The relationship didn't end the day she left. One of the hardest things to accept about a breakup is that it rarely begins on the day it happens. Most men remember the final conversation because that's the moment everything becomes official. That's the day she says she isn't happy anymore. That's the day she says she needs space, needs time, or thinks it's best to move on. That's the day that sticks in your memory because it's impossible to ignore. But if you're honest with yourself, the relationship often started changing long before that conversation ever happened. The signs were there in small moments. The way she stopped sharing little details about her day. The way conversations became shorter. The way problems that used to get discussed suddenly got pushed aside. Nothing looked dramatic enough to call it an ending, but something felt different. You noticed it. You just didn't know what it meant. The confusing part is that emotional distance rarely announces itself. It doesn't walk into the room and tell you exactly what's happening. Instead, it shows up quietly. She still says good morning. She still asks how work was. She still sits next to you on the couch. From the outside, the relationship may even look normal. That's why so many men talk themselves out of their own observations. They tell themselves they're being insecure. They tell themselves it's just a rough week. They tell themselves every couple goes through phases. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes relationships do go through difficult periods and come out stronger. But sometimes what you're feeling isn't a rough patch. Sometimes you're sensing that the emotional connection is slowly weakening. Not because of one fight, not because of one bad day, because one person has started pulling away internally while still remaining physically present. What's even more difficult is that people don't always tell the truth when they're emotionally leaving a relationship. Not necessarily because they're trying to deceive you. Often they're trying to avoid hurting you. Sometimes they're trying to avoid admitting the truth to themselves. They know something feels different, but they aren't ready to put clear words around it. So instead of saying what's really happening, they say things that sound safer. Things that buy time. Things that avoid conflict. Things that keep the relationship in a state of uncertainty a little longer. And if you're not paying attention, those explanations can keep you focused on the words, while the relationship itself keeps moving in another direction. That's why understanding these conversations matters. Because when someone is emotionally checking out, the truth is usually hiding in their actions, long before it ever reaches their lips. Number 1, I just need to focus on myself for a while. At first, this doesn't sound alarming at all. In fact, it sounds reasonable. Everyone goes through periods where life feels overwhelming. Work gets stressful. Family problems show up. Personal goals get neglected. There are absolutely times when someone genuinely needs to spend more energy on themselves. That's why this phrase is so difficult to question. When she says she needs to focus on herself, your first instinct is usually to be supportive. You tell her you understand. You try to give her room. You convince yourself that once things settle down, the relationship will return to normal. But then something strange starts happening. The relationship doesn't feel like it's temporarily taking a back seat. It feels like it's being left behind altogether. The effort that once came naturally starts disappearing. The conversations become less frequent. The affection becomes less consistent. The connection begins feeling like something she's managing, rather than something she's enjoying. What makes this situation painful is that you often keep waiting for the period of focusing on herself to end. You tell yourself she's just stressed. You tell yourself she needs time. Weeks pass. Sometimes months pass. Yet somehow the distance remains. That's when you start noticing something important. She still has energy for other things. She still talks enthusiastically about certain plans. She still makes time for certain people. She still finds excitement in parts of her life. The only place where her energy seems permanently reduced is the relationship itself. That's the moment many men begin feeling confused. Not because they don't want her to focus on herself, but because the relationship seems to have become the thing she's comfortable living without. The words suggest a temporary adjustment. The behavior suggests something much bigger. The difficult truth is that when someone is emotionally invested, they usually try to bring you into their life, even during stressful periods. Maybe they have less time, maybe they have less energy, but they still look for ways to stay connected. They still want you to understand what's happening. They still make you feel like you're part of the picture. When emotional withdrawal begins, the opposite often happens. The relationship slowly becomes separated from everything else. You're no longer someone she's leaning toward during difficult moments. You're someone she's creating more distance from. That's why this phrase can be so misleading. On the surface, it sounds like she's trying to solve a personal problem. Sometimes she is, but sometimes it's a softer way of creating emotional space because she no longer feels as connected as she once did. And if that's what's happening, the real story won't be found in the explanation. It'll be found in the growing distance that follows it. Number 2 lie is, you're reading too much into everything. This one can make a man question his own judgment more than almost anything else. It usually happens after you've been noticing little changes for a while. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you can point to and say, this is definitely the problem. Just a collection of small things that don't feel the same anymore. She doesn't seem as excited to talk. The affection feels different. Plans happen less often. Conversations that used to last an hour now last 10 minutes. You keep trying to ignore it because you don't want to be the guy who creates problems where none exist. But eventually, the feeling becomes too strong to dismiss. So you bring it up. Not to start an argument, not to accuse her of anything, just to understand what's happening. And that's when you hear it. You're reading too much into everything. The reason this phrase is so powerful is because it shifts the focus away from the relationship and onto you. Suddenly, the issue isn't the distance you've been feeling. The issue is your reaction to the distance. Instead of discussing what changed, you're defending why you noticed it. Instead of getting clarity, you're left wondering whether you've imagined the whole thing. And for a while, that explanation can work. You tell yourself, maybe you're being sensitive. Maybe stress is making you overanalyze. Maybe you've been paying too much attention to details that don't matter. But then the same things keep happening. The coldness remains. The effort remains inconsistent. The connection still feels weaker than it used to. That's when the confusion starts turning into frustration. Not because you need constant reassurance, but because your experience keeps being dismissed instead of addressed. The reality is that healthy relationships can handle honest observations. If something feels off and you're bringing it up respectfully, there should be room to talk about it. There should be room to explore what's going on without immediately making you feel foolish for noticing. That's why repeated dismissal can be such a significant sign. It's not the phrase itself that's the problem. It's what happens after the phrase. Do the conversations become more open and honest? Or does every concern get pushed aside the same way? Because when someone is emotionally engaged, they usually care about understanding why you're feeling disconnected. When someone is emotionally withdrawing, they often become more interested in ending the conversation than exploring it. And that's the detail many men miss. The issue isn't whether you're reading too much into things. The issue is whether the relationship keeps giving you the same reason to ask the question in the first place. Number 3 lie is, things have just felt different recently. This is one of those statements that sounds honest while somehow saying almost nothing at all. You've probably heard it before. Maybe not those exact words, but something close. I don't know. Things just feel different. Something feels off lately. I can't really explain it. The conversation usually happens after you've noticed distance building for weeks. You sit down, hoping for clarity, hoping for something concrete you can understand and respond to. Instead, you get a feeling, not a reason, not a specific issue, just a vague sense that something has changed. And because it's so unclear, your mind immediately starts searching for answers. Was it something you did, something you didn't do, a fight from months ago, a mistake you never realized you made? You start digging through the relationship looking for a cause, because the explanation you received doesn't actually explain anything. What makes this situation especially difficult is that vague explanations keep hope alive. If she said directly, "I've lost feelings," at least you'd know where you stand. Painful as that would be, there would be something solid to face. But when someone says things just feel different, it creates a space where almost any outcome seems possible. Maybe she's just confused. Maybe she needs time. Maybe things will go back to normal next month. So you keep investing. You keep waiting. You keep trying to be patient. Meanwhile, the relationship remains stuck in an uncomfortable middle ground where nobody is saying the thing that needs to be said. One person is trying to understand what's happening. The other person is describing the situation without really defining it. And the longer that continues, the more exhausting it becomes for everyone involved. The truth is that feelings don't usually disappear overnight. They tend to fade gradually. Interest weakens slowly. Emotional investment decreases little by little. By the time someone says things feel different, they've often been experiencing that feeling internally for quite a while. That's why these conversations can feel so one-sided. You're hearing about the change for the first time, but they've been living with it for weeks or months. They're already further along in the process than you are. And that's an important thing to recognize. Not because it means the relationship is automatically over, but because it helps explain why the conversation feels so uneven. You're searching for answers. They're describing a reality they've already been quietly adjusting to. When that happens, don't get trapped trying to decode every word. Pay attention to what the relationship actually looks like now compared to what it looked like before. Because the real message is often hiding in that difference. Number 4 lie is, "I don't want to hurt you." On the surface, this sounds caring. It sounds compassionate. It sounds like something someone says because they genuinely care about your feelings. And sometimes that's exactly what it is. Nobody wants to be the person who causes pain to someone they once loved. But when this sentence starts appearing repeatedly in conversations about the relationship, it often signals something deeper. Think about it for a moment. People usually say, "I don't want to hurt you," when they already know that what they're about to say, or what they're avoiding saying, has the potential to hurt. That's why this phrase can feel so unsettling. It often arrives before the truth does. It's like hearing thunder before the storm reaches you. The difficult part is that this statement can keep a man emotionally stuck for a long time. When you hear it, you naturally focus on the care behind the words. You think, "She still cares about me," and she probably does. The problem is that caring about someone and wanting a relationship with them are not always the same thing. A woman can genuinely not want to hurt you while simultaneously feeling herself moving away emotionally. That's what makes this stage so confusing. Her kindness can make you believe the relationship is healthier than it actually is. She may still check on you. She may still be polite. She may still avoid arguments. But underneath those behaviors, something important has changed. The emotional investment that once held the relationship together isn't showing up in the same way anymore. The affection feels cautious. The conversations feel careful. It's as if she's trying to manage your disappointment before she's fully ready to confront it herself. This is why actions matter so much during this phase. If someone says they don't want to hurt you, but continues working on the relationship, continues communicating honestly, and continues making an effort to stay connected, that's one thing. But if the statement is followed by more distance, more uncertainty, and less investment, then the words start serving a different purpose. They become a cushion, a softer landing, a way of easing into an ending that hasn't been spoken out loud yet. Many men hear, "I don't want to hurt you," and immediately focus on the possibility that things can still be fixed. What they should pay attention to is the direction the relationship is moving afterward. Because concern for your feelings is meaningful, but concern alone cannot keep a relationship alive. At some point, effort has to accompany it. And when the effort keeps disappearing while the concern remains, that's often when the reality of the situation starts revealing itself. Maybe we both need some time to think. This is often the sentence that keeps a relationship alive on paper long after it's already struggling in reality. When a woman says, "Maybe we both need some time to think," it doesn't sound like a breakup. That's exactly why it can be so difficult to process. It sounds temporary. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like a pause button rather than a stop button. And because it sounds temporary, many men immediately focus on what happens after the break. They imagine the conversation where everything gets fixed. They imagine her coming back with clarity. They imagine the relationship returning to what it used to be. What they don't always realize is that the relationship they're hoping to return to may have already disappeared weeks or months earlier. The hard part about these situations is that waiting can feel productive when it really isn't. You tell yourself you're giving her space. You tell yourself you're respecting what she asked for. Meanwhile, you're mentally standing still. You're checking your phone more often than usual. You're replaying old memories. You're looking for signs that she's missing you as much as you're missing her. The relationship enters a strange state where nobody knows exactly what is happening, yet everything feels heavy. And during that time, it's easy to focus on the possibility of getting back together while ignoring the reality that led to the break in the first place. The distance didn't appear overnight. The uncertainty didn't come from nowhere. Something changed long before this conversation happened. The request for time is often just the point where that change becomes impossible to ignore. What matters most is what happens during the time apart. Does she use that space to reconnect, communicate, and work toward rebuilding the relationship? Or does the distance continue growing? Because that's where the answer usually lives. Not in the promise of future clarity, but in the direction things move afterward. Many men become trapped by the hope contained inside the phrase. They hear "time to think" and assume the relationship is being protected. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the relationship is quietly being prepared for an ending that one person isn't ready to say out loud yet. That's why it's so important not to become attached to the words themselves. Pay attention to the reality that follows them. Reality has a way of revealing what someone's heart is doing long before their mouth catches up. By the time the truth is spoken, the distance is usually already there. One of the most painful lessons in relationships is realizing that people don't always leave when they walk out the door. Sometimes they leave long before that. Sometimes they leave in small pieces. A little less effort this month, a little less excitement next month, a little less emotional openness after that. By the time the final conversation arrives, one person has often been adjusting to the ending for much longer than the other. That's why breakups can feel so sudden to one person and strangely expected to the other. They're experiencing different timelines. That doesn't mean every difficult conversation signals the end. Relationships go through rough seasons. People get stressed. Feelings fluctuate. Life becomes complicated. The point isn't to treat every phrase in this video like a prediction of doom. The point is to notice when words and actions stop telling the same story. Anyone can say they need time. Anyone can say they're confused. Anyone can say things feel different. The real question is what happens next. Does the relationship become stronger through those conversations, or does it continue drifting further away? That's the difference that matters. When someone is emotionally leaving, they often struggle to say it directly. Sometimes they're trying to protect you. Sometimes they're trying to protect themselves. Sometimes they're still hoping their feelings will change. But eventually, actions become impossible to ignore. And that's where your attention should be. Not on finding the perfect interpretation of every sentence, not on searching for hidden meanings. Look at the direction of the relationship. Look at the effort. Look at whether two people are moving toward each other or away from each other. Because long before the truth is spoken clearly, the relationship itself is usually telling you exactly what's happening.